If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with squirrels, then chances are you've found some buried treasure in your garden. I'm talking about nuts, specifically acorns. Acorns are a favorite treat for squirrels, but they also like to hide them away for a future snack. But if they know exactly where that stash is, why do squirrels sometimes forget where they've hidden their nuts? Is it really forgetfulness? Or is there more to it than that? It turns out there's an evolutionary reason behind their forgetful behavior. And if you stick around until the end of this episode, we'll tell you how you can take advantage of it. And welcome to Life Noggin. So let's start off with a little story. Once upon a time, not too long ago, in a forest not too far from here, a squirrel was busy gathering food for the winter. She found the perfect acorn, took it back to her tree, and proceeded to bury it in a secret spot. She marked the spot and trotted off for the day, planning to return for that acorn come winter. When winter came, the squirrel came back for her acorn, only to find that she could remember where she deburied it. Luckily for her, she had buried so many acorns that she was able to find another one and get the nutrition she needed. Now that may seem like just a simple story about a squirrel who could remember where she buried one nut. But scientists believe that this kind of thing happens often, and there's a reason for it. If you're a squirrel, burying nuts is a great way to save food for the future. You see, acorns don't keep well through the winter, so if a squirrel wants to have a snack in January, they need to hide them first. This is called a food storage system. Animals like squirrels rely on hiding food as a means of getting food when they cut and get it at that very moment. However, there are some problems with this kind of system. First, other animals might dig up the stashed food before you get a chance to eat it. And second, you might forget where you put it. Squirrels employ a strategy to help with the first problem. They typically bury their nuts deep enough to avoid being dug up by other animals. As for the second problem, well, scientists think they have a solution for that too. In a study published in 2016, researchers at the University of California set out to determine if squirrels intentionally forget where they hide their nuts. In the experiment, two groups of squirrels were separated into individual cages with food. The first group of squirrels had free access to food throughout the day, while the second group had food only at night, since nocturnal animals like raccoons could easily dig up buried nuts. The researchers reasoned that the squirrels in the second group would be more likely to forget where they stashed their food in order to avoid it being stolen. Well, they were right. After 3 months, the squirrels that only had access to food at night had buried and forgotten significantly more nuts than the squirrels that had access to food during the day.
Ow.
This tells us that squirrels don't necessarily forget where they hide their nuts. Instead, they actually intentionally hide them in places where they're more likely to forget. And this has everything to do with their survival. You see, even though it would make sense for a squirrel to remember where its hidden nuts are, it actually benefits them more to not know. Let's go back to the first group of squirrels, the ones that always had access to food. If these squirrels remember where all of their hidden nuts are, then they'll eventually stop burying them. That's because if a squirrel keeps finding their nuts, they'll eventually realize that the energy they re-expending looking for a nut is more than the energy they re-getting from it, so they'll just stop burying nuts altogether. But if these squirrels occasionally forget where they've buried some of their nuts, then they'll continue to search for those lost nuts. And every now and then they'll stumble upon a nut that they hadn't realized they buried. This is what scientists call an incentive to maintain a behavior. In other words, squirrels will keep burying nuts as long as they occasionally forget where they've buried them before. This might seem a little confusing, so let's break it down with an analogy. Imagine you have a big stack of homework to do, but you can only do a few problems at a time. At the beginning, you might spend a lot of time doing your homework. But after a while, you start to get pretty good grades, and you feel less motivated. That's kind of like our squirrel. After a while, they realize that the effort they putting into burying nuts isn't worth the reward they are getting. So they stop burying nuts. But what if you had a really good friend who would randomly remind you that you had homework to do every now and then? You might not like it at first, but eventually you'd realize that you're doing your homework more often than not. And that's kind of like our squirrel that occasionally forgets where they've buried a nut. They're constantly reminded to keep up their nut-burying behavior. So although squirrels do sometimes forget where they've hidden their nuts, this isn't really a bad thing. In fact, it's part of their clever strategy to make sure they always have food stored away for the winter. And although it might seem like squirrels are just running around like crazy, all that running around ensures that they can stay active and healthy. Now that you know why squirrels forget where they've hidden their nuts, You might be wondering what you can do with this information. Well, one researcher suggested that we might be able to use this knowledge to develop better ways of teaching animals in captivity. Another researcher thinks that this information might be useful for farmers who deal with pesky, nut-stealing critters. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to teach your pet squirrel where to hide their nuts. So what should we talk about next? Please let us know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe so you can catch our latest episodes. Thanks for watching.